Hi, I'm Dan Hayden, and this is the Positive Legacy Podcast for Christian fathers. My mission is to help Christian men show up as calm and steady leaders, both at home and in the workplace, so that they can build a lasting legacy of faith and connection with their families and beyond. Today, we're kicking off a new series called Activating Faith, Daily Habits to Build Trust with Your Kids. This first episode is the stage setter. It's called A Calm and Steady Father, How Kids Learn to Trust You. Over this series, we'll learn 3 daily habits that activate faith and build trust. The first is emotional availability. The second is repair. And the third is consistent character. But before we even go there, we need to talk about who your kids are actually experiencing before you even walk into the room. Most dads hear terms like build trust and disciple your kids, and they think about the big moments, the serious talks, the disciplined conversations, and those heart-to-heart moments. Hey, don't get me wrong, those moments absolutely matter. But in my experience and in scripture, faith and trust are usually forged in something much quieter, the daily small moments that interrupt you. Jesus points to this in Luke when he talks about being faithful in the very little. It's not flashy, it's not impressive, but it's incredibly powerful. Trust with our kids is rarely built in the moments that we actually plan. It's built in the moments that interrupt us and interrupt our daily lives and our patterns and our rhythms. Maybe it's the look on your face when you walk into the room. Maybe it's the tone in your voice when they ask you the small questions. You think they're small, but to them, they're pretty big questions. And maybe it's whether you're going to pause and actually care about what they're saying, or you're just going to push through it. You know, over time, those tiny little moments answer a question that your kids are always asking, and usually without words. What happens when I bring myself and my problems to dad? Not just my behavior, not just my bad grades, not just my achievements, but I bring me, my joy, my mess, and my mistakes. One of the most freeing shifts you can make as a dad is this. Your faith at home is not primarily taught, it's experienced, and it's experienced by everybody around you. Your kids are not evaluating your theology. They probably don't even know what that means. They're experiencing your presence in church, your presence in the car, your presence around the dinner table, and maybe even on a random Wednesday night when everybody's just dog tired and finally realizing it's not even Friday yet. You know, John talks about loving in action and in truth. That's about embodiment. Faith that shows up in your tone, your posture, and your consistency. Maybe instead of asking yourself, am I saying the right things? A better question would be, what does it feel like to be with me? I have a daughter who checks my tone every single time she walks into the room. She just looks at me and goes, hey, Dad. And she immediately wants to know, am I going to make eye contact with her? Am I going to acknowledge her? Am I going to ignore her? That's how she's checking the pulse. That's how she's checking what it feels like to be with me. You know, 2 years ago, if I'm being honest, being around me kind of felt like walking on eggshells sometimes. The tension in our house was thick. My kids could drop a fork at the dinner table and the whole room would stop and just look to see how I was going to react. Is he going to blow up at me this time? That's what it felt like to be around me sometimes. You know, PQ and the Sage perspective didn't magically remove the stress from my life, but they changed how I show up under stress. Less reactivity, more steadiness, more ability to pause between impulse and response. And that pause, that's the space between stimulus and how I respond, is where the trust grows. In Galatians 5, Paul contrasts the acts of the flesh with the fruit of the Spirit. We know the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But if you read the verses right before that, some of the acts of the flesh sound a lot like our saboteurs under stress: hatred and discord, jealousy, fits of rage, self-ambition, dissensions, factions, and envy. That's the judge, the controller, the victim, the hyperachiever, and all the fear-based patterns that we've been talking about. The fruit of the Spirit, on the other hand, gives us a relational picture of sage leadership. Not all at once and not perfectly, but increasingly available as we walk by the Spirit. PQ is the mental fitness tool that helps you interrupt those patterns with PQ reps and choose to respond from the fruit of the Spirit. That's your sage, your spirit-led self, rather than respond out of things like fear and anger and envy and judgment. Psalm 46 says, "Be still and know that I am God." Stillness precedes knowing. Mental fitness gives you access to that stillness inside, even when life outside is anything but calm. Here's a question I ask most men that are in my program. When I'm stressed or tired, who does my family get? Not who do you intend to be? Because none of us want to be, the guy around whom everybody's walking on eggshells. But who actually shows up in those small moments? I ask them, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being just miserable, checked out, the kind of eggshell dad, or 10 being everything's rainbows and butterflies, which honestly isn't very realistic either. Most of us want to live somewhere between 6 and 8, right? We're human. We want to be human. We want to be honest, but we also want to be generally present and approachable and steady. Your kids don't experience your intentions. They experience your reactions. And those reactions are shaped by whether your saboteurs are running the show or your spirit-led sage self. Years ago in Afghanistan, I worked for a 2-star general who later retired as a 3-star. I asked him for a favor once, and he said yes. Then he told me why. He shared some advice that had been given to him by his old boss when he was a 3-star agent. He shared 3 simple guidelines, and they sort of go like this. Make time for the things that are important to you. Make time for the things that are important to the people that are important to you. And make time for once-in-a-lifetime events. We're going to focus on the second one. Making time for the things that are important to the people that are important to us. Sometimes that's a big thing, like taking my daughters and their friends to see the Stranger Things finale in the theaters on New Year's Eve. What an awesome experience that was. I was more than happy to go. But honestly, the real trust was built in the 5 seconds it took me to say yes. Yeah, of course I'll take you. Let's buy the tickets. That small yes was another brick in the wall of trust. It was another answer to what happens when I bring dad what matters most to me. I want you to hear this clearly. This is not about doing more. It's about becoming more intentional with what already exists. God could have transformed his people instantly. Instead, he chose daily provision, daily bread, daily dependence, daily faithfulness. Trust is not built through intensity. It's built through rhythms. Your kids don't need you to be amazing. They just need you to be predictably present. That's what this series coming up is all about. Over the next 3 episodes, we'll explore 3 habits that make your faith visible to your kids over time. The first is emotional availability. This answers the question, is it safe to come to dad? The next is repair. This answers the questions, what happens when things go wrong? The last is consistent character. The question that's going to be answered for your kids in this one is, who am I getting today? Which dad is going to show up for me today? These aren't new techniques. They're what it looks like when your sage, your spirit-led self, is leading at home. You'll hear stories from my own life, but I'm going to keep the deep dive and the step-by-step work for the men that are in my program who come to my master classes and come to my coaching calls. But in this series, I want to give you vision, encouragement, and one simple practice each week to start living this out. So here's your experiment for this week. Pick one daily moment where you most want to be calm and steady. Maybe it's walking in the front door after work. Maybe it's the first time you see your kids in the morning or sitting down at the dinner table. Or maybe even it's just starting your bedtime routine. But before that moment, take 10 seconds. 10 seconds. That is it. Take one slow, deliberate breath. And while you're doing that, feel one physical sensation. Maybe it's your hand on the doorknob or your feet on the floor. Or maybe it's your hand on your kid's shoulder. Quietly pray, Lord, help me show up calm and steady in this moment. Then you can ask yourself, if my kids are learning who God is from how I show up in the next 10 minutes, how do I want to show up? Not perfectly, just 10% more intentional than usual. You're already doing the most important part, You're on the field. You're in the game. You've got your helmet on. Your chin strap is strapped up. You're no longer watching from the stands. In the next episode, we'll dive into emotional availability, what it really means to be a safe place for your kids, even when you're tired, when they're tired, and then how that can help activate their faith. Hey, as you look at this week, which one daily moment are you willing to experiment with being just a little more calm and steady than before? Great talk. I'll see you next week.